Tuesday morning dawned gray over the city's financial district as Clara Miller stepped off the crowded bus near the 2000 block. Her hands trembled as she gripped the strap of her worn canvas bag, inside which lay a manila envelope she had carried for weeks as if it were the most precious object on earth. At 26, Clara looked like someone who knew the true meaning of struggle. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her short nails revealed years of work as a cleaning lady, and the cheap cotton dress she wore was clean but visibly faded from countless washes. She paused on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the hurried flow of executives in their sharp suits, elegant women with their designer bags, all walking with the confidence of those who belonged to this world. Clara took a deep breath. She wasn't from this world, never had been, but today she needed to step into it. Today she had a purpose that transcended her natural shyness and the fear she felt treading this unfamiliar territory. The Metropolitan Business Bank stood imposing in the middle of the block, its mirrored glass facade reflecting the heavy clouds above. Clara knew this was no ordinary bank. It was an exclusive financial institution that catered only to clients with multi-million-dollar assets. Never in her life had she imagined she would have reason to cross those doors. But life, she had learned in recent months, held twists impossible to predict. As she pushed through the revolving glass door, she felt her heart race. The main lobby was even more intimidating than she had imagined. The Italian marble floor gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. Everything here breathed money and power. There were only half a dozen people in the vast space, all dressed as if they had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. The silence was almost religious, broken only by the discreet sound of high heels against the marble and the low murmur of phone conversations. Clara approached the reception desk with hesitant steps. She pressed the envelope against her chest, as if that gesture could give her the courage she lacked. Behind the counter, a man in his early 40s watched her. His suit was an impeccable gray, his hair perfectly slicked back with gel, and a watch gleamed on his wrist, likely costing more than Clara earned in an entire year of work. "Good morning," she said, her voice weaker than intended. "I need to sort out an inheritance matter." The manager, whose name tag identified him as Robert Allen, scrutinized her from head to toe. His gaze lingered on Clara's simple clothes, her worn sandals, her hands marked by labor. A shadow of irritation crossed his elegant face. "Inheritance," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "And do you have an account here?" "No," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But my father did. He passed away 8 months ago, and I need to arrange the transfer of assets." Robert let out a short, dry laugh that echoed through the silent lobby. A few clients turned their heads toward them. Clara felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Look, miss," Robert said, resting his elbows on the counter and leaning forward with a condescending smile. "This bank serves a very specific clientele. Very select, if you catch my drift. We don't do personal loans. We don't have basic checking accounts. We don't do anything like that. I think you must have the wrong place. The bank you're looking for is probably down the street, around the corner." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked quickly to hold them back. She couldn't cry. Not here, not now. She had come prepared for resistance, but not for such direct and cruel humiliation. "I haven't made a mistake, sir," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I have all the documents right here. If you could just check the system." She held out the manila envelope, but Robert didn't move to take it. Instead, he crossed his arms and sighed with exaggerated impatience. "Documents," he repeated, waving a dismissive hand. "Listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. People come in here every day with stories about inheritance, rich relatives nobody knew about, forgotten money. And you know what all those stories have in common? They're fake, they're scams, or just cases of wishful thinking." Clara felt the blood rush to her face. "It's not a scam, sir. I have a court order. I have a DNA test. I have everything necessary." Robert rolled his eyes. "DNA," he scoffed, pronouncing the word like an absurdity. "And let me guess, You're the secret daughter of some billionaire businessman who had a fling with your mother, right? And now, conveniently after he passed away, you show up with some wild story trying to snatch a fortune that isn't yours." The words were like slaps across the face. Clara felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Around them, other clients had stopped what they were doing and were watching the scene with curiosity and judgment. She wanted to disappear, to evaporate, to cease existing in that moment. But she couldn't. She had come here for a reason, and that reason was bigger than her humiliation. "It's not like that," she whispered, her voice almost failing. "My mother never wanted anything from him. She raised me alone, working as a house cleaner, scrubbing 3 different homes a day. She never asked for a dime. It was only when I discovered the truth, when I found the old letters stored in her closet, that I decided to seek my rights." Robert slammed his hand on the counter, making Clara jump. "Mr. Henry Taylor, who was a client of this bank and who you claim is your father, was one of the most respected businessmen in the city. Do you really think a man of that caliber would leave an heir dressed like this, who doesn't even know how to use the basic services of a bank like ours?" Every word was a new layer of poison. Clara gripped the envelope so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He didn't know I existed," she said, her voice now breaking. "My mother lost contact with him when she found out she was pregnant. She was afraid he would think it was a setup, that she was after his money. So she simply disappeared from his life and raised me alone." "What a convenient story," Robert said, sarcastically. "And you expect me to believe that? That I should just type a name into the system and grant access to a multi-million-dollar account to someone who showed up here out of nowhere?" "Please," Clara pleaded, tears now streaming freely down her face. "I spent 6 months fighting in court. I sold everything I owned to pay the lawyer. I took the DNA test 3 times because no one believed me. All I ask is that you check, just that. Type the social security number into the system and see that there is a court order waiting to be fulfilled." Robert stood up from his chair, and Clara realized he was genuinely angry now. His voice rose in volume, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear clearly. "I am not going to type anything, miss. And do you know why? Because I know a fraud when I see one. Do you think you're the first person to come here with a story like this? Do you think I'm an idiot? This bank has protocols, security, a reputation to uphold. And I will not tarnish that reputation by allowing just anyone to walk in here with a manila envelope and a teary story to try and steal the assets of our deceased clients." "I am not just anyone," Clara said, now also raising her voice, a mixture of desperation and anger taking over. "I am Clara Miller Taylor, daughter of Henry Taylor and Maria Miller, and I have a legal right to what my father left behind. He recognized me before he passed. It's all documented." Robert made an impatient gesture with his hand, as if swatting a fly. "You're wearing me out, miss. Either you leave peacefully now, or I call security and you leave the hard way. I might even call the police for attempted fraud and disturbing the peace. Choose." Clara looked around, desperate. Everyone was staring at her as if she were a criminal, as if she were dirty, unworthy of being there. She felt small, insignificant, as if she were a child again, and her schoolmates were mocking her for not having a father, for wearing donated clothes, for being different. It was then that Robert signaled to the security guard posted near the entrance. The man, tall and muscular in his Navy uniform, began walking toward them. Clara felt panic tighten her chest. It couldn't end like this, not after everything she had been through. "Sir, please," she said, her voice coming out between sobs. "I just need you to look at the documents, that's all. I'm not a scammer, I'm not crazy. I just want what is rightfully mine." The security guard reached the counter. "Ma'am," he said in a firm but not hostile tone, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're causing a disturbance to the other clients." Clara looked at the envelope in her hands. Inside was everything. The birth certificate issued after the posthumous recognition of paternity, the DNA test report, the court judgment mandating the transfer of assets, 6 months of battle, humiliation, accumulated debt, and now she was being expelled like a trespasser. She opened her mouth to try one last time, but no sound came out. What was the point? No one here would believe her. To these people, she was just another poor person trying to take advantage of a situation, inventing stories to get easy money. The security guard was already reaching out to guide her toward the exit when the revolving door began to move. A man entered the lobby with decisive steps. He wore an impeccably tailored navy suit, his graying hair slicked back, revealing his approximate age of 50. He carried a leather briefcase and had the posture of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. He stopped a few feet from the counter, his intelligent eyes quickly assessing the situation. The security guard with his hand on the arm of a clearly distressed young woman, the manager with an expression of irritation, the other clients watching as if they were witnessing an unpleasant spectacle. "What seems to be the problem here?" the man asked, his voice calm, but carrying natural authority. Robert turned to him, his face still red with irritation. "No problem, Dr. Foster. Just resolving an unpleasant situation. The young lady is leaving now." August Foster, for that was the newcomer's name, took a few steps forward. "It didn't look to me like she was leaving voluntarily. It looked like she was being forced out, and I'd like to know the reason." Robert hesitated. This man was clearly someone important, someone the bank couldn't afford to displease. "She came here with an absurd story about inheritance, trying to gain access to funds that clearly don't belong to her. We are just following security protocols." August looked at Clara, who was still clutching the envelope to her chest, tears wetting her face. "And do you have documentation to prove your story, miss?" he asked her directly. Clara nodded, unable to speak. She held out the envelope with trembling hands. August took it and began examining its contents right there, standing in the middle of the lobby. Robert watched with growing discomfort, unsure how to react. The silence that followed was dense. August read each document with meticulous attention, turning the pages slowly, his eyes scanning every line. Clara could barely breathe. She didn't know who this man was, but he was her last hope. After what felt like an eternity, August looked up from the documents and fixed Robert with an expression that mixed disapproval and disbelief. "These documents appear perfectly legitimate. There is a clear court order here mandating the release of funds. There is a DNA test certified by an accredited lab. There is posthumous recognition of paternity with all the necessary signatures and stamps. Why exactly is this young woman being treated like a criminal?" Robert swallowed hard. "Well, doctor, it's just that she arrived here with a very strange story and you decided to judge her by her appearance." August finished the sentence, his voice sharp. "You decided that simply because she isn't wearing expensive clothes or doesn't speak with the right accent, she couldn't possibly be the heir to a client of this bank. Is this the new customer service protocol the institution has adopted?" Robert felt sweat begin to form on his forehead. August Foster's voice echoed through the lobby with an authority that could not be ignored. All the other clients were now watching the scene with renewed interest, but this time the judgmental looks were no longer directed only at Clara. "Dr. Foster," Robert began, trying to regain some composure, "you need to understand that we receive numerous attempts at fraud monthly. It is my duty to protect the assets of the bank and our clients. I was just being cautious." "Cautious," August repeated, his tone laced with irony. "Cautious would be verifying the documentation before publicly humiliating someone who has every right to be here. What you did was pure and simple prejudice. And as a corporate attorney specializing in succession, I can assure you that this constitutes gross negligence in the performance of your duties." Clara watched everything as if in a dream. This man was defending her, validating her story, treating her with the dignity Robert had denied her. She had no idea who he was or why he was helping her, but the gratitude she felt was almost suffocating. August turned his attention back to Clara, and his severe gaze softened considerably. "Miss, could you please tell me the full name of your deceased father and his social security number?" Clara wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand. "Henry August Taylor," she said, her voice still trembling. She recited the numbers she had memorized after repeating them so many times in courthouses, tribunals, and law offices. August turned to Robert. Now, if it's not too much trouble, I would like you to consult the system and verify if there is an account under that Social Security number, and if there is a pending court order for execution. Robert hesitated for only a second before realizing he had no choice. With slightly trembling fingers, he sat down at the computer and began typing. The silence in the bank was absolute. The only sound was the rapid clicking of keys and the low hum of the air conditioning. Clara gripped the counter for support. Her legs felt about to give way. In her mind, flashes of every step she had taken to get here passed by. The discovery of the old love letters in her mother's closet, hidden in a dusty shoebox. The decision to seek out the man who was her biological father, only to find out he had passed away months earlier. The exhausting legal battle to prove her parentage. The nights her mother, Maria, cried softly in the next room, blaming herself for depriving her daughter of knowing her father. The debts they had incurred with lawyers, years of savings, evaporated in court costs. Robert's face gradually changed as he read what appeared on the screen. Irritation and arrogance gave way first to surprise, then to genuine shock, and finally to what appeared to be fear. "So, Robert," August said calmly, breaking the tense silence, "did you find anything?" Robert opened and closed his mouth a few times before he could speak. He began, his voice coming out hoarse. "There is an account, yes. A premium business account in the name of Henry August Taylor, in active status since the holder's passing 8 months ago, and there is a court order registered 3 weeks ago mandating the transfer of 70% of the funds to Clara Miller Taylor upon presentation of complete documentation and proof of identity." "And what is the balance of that account?" August asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to force Robert to admit it aloud. Robert swallowed hard. $4,783,000, plus investments totaling approximately another $2 million. A murmur ran through the lobby. Clara felt her legs finally fail and grabbed the counter with both hands. Almost $7 million. Her mind couldn't process that number. It was more money than she could earn in 10 lifetimes working as a cleaning lady. August crossed his arms and fixed Robert with a hard expression. "Then tell me, Robert Allen, according to your name tag, how exactly do you justify trying to expel a legitimate heir with complete judicial documentation from an account worth almost $7 million, basing your decision exclusively on the fact that she was wearing simple clothes?" Robert opened his mouth, but no convincing excuse came out. I made an error in judgment. I didn't know that." "Didn't know what?" August interrupted him, his voice now loud enough to echo across the marble. "Didn't know that poor people can be legitimate heirs? Didn't know that your job is to verify documentation and not make assumptions based on appearance? Didn't know that discrimination is a crime and that exposing someone to public embarrassment can lead to a lawsuit for emotional distress?" Clara watched everything still in shock. Part of her wanted to scream with joy, to hug this unknown man who had appeared like an avenging angel. Another part was still paralyzed by the magnitude of what was happening. Her life, which had changed drastically when she discovered her father's identity, was about to change again, even more radically. "Dr. Foster," Robert tried again, panic now evident in his voice. "I apologize, sincerely. Miss Miller, I deeply regret the misunderstanding. If you can forgive me, we can resolve everything right now quickly and professionally." "Misunderstanding," Clara heard her own voice say, surprised by the firmness she managed to inject into the words. "You called me a scammer. You accused me of trying to steal. You threatened to turn me over to the police. You made a point of humiliating me in front of everyone. And now that you've discovered I was telling the truth, you want to call it a misunderstanding?" Robert paled. "Miss, I was just doing my job, trying to protect the bank." "Your job," August intervened, "is to verify documentation and follow protocols. It is not to judge people by the clothes they wear or the social class they belong to. And I am certain that regional management will be very interested to know how their employees treat legitimate clients." Upon hearing the mention of regional management, Robert grew even paler. "Please, doctor," he said, his voice now pleading. There's no need to involve the regional office. I will resolve this now. Give Miss Miller all the necessary support. Ensure everything is processed with the utmost priority." "Too late for that," a female voice said behind them. Everyone turned. A woman in her 50s walked across the lobby from the administrative area. She wore a sharp burgundy executive suit, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and her brown eyes radiated a mixture of authority and irritation. Her name, Tag identified her as Beatrice Nolan, regional manager. "I was in the meeting room," she said, stopping next to August and looking directly at Robert. "The walls are glass, as you well know. I saw and heard everything that happened here in the last 15 minutes, and I am absolutely disgusted." Robert seemed to shrink. "Ms. Nolan, I can explain." "Explain what, Robert?" she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "Explain why you treated a legitimate client as if she were a criminal? Explain why you failed to follow the basic protocol of documentation verification before making serious accusations? Explain why you thought it appropriate to expose this young woman to public humiliation?" Beatrice turned to Clara, and her severe expression softened. "Miss Miller, on behalf of the Metropolitan Business Bank, I offer my most sincere and profound apologies for the absolutely unacceptable treatment you received today. Mr. Allen's behavior does not reflect the values of this institution and will be dealt with the utmost severity." Clara just nodded, still unable to fully process everything that was happening. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster that left her exhausted. August spoke again. "Ms. Nolan, as Miss Miller's attorney, I would like to formally request that the security camera footage be preserved. It will be necessary for the lawsuit for emotional distress that will be filed against the bank and against Mr. Allen personally." "Lawsuit for emotional distress," Robert repeated, panic now total on his face. Beatrice nodded to August. "The footage will be preserved immediately, and as for Mr. Allen, he is suspended from his duties, effective immediately. Robert, you will report to the Human Resources Office and wait there. The legal department will be in touch regarding the appropriate measures." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but a look from Beatrice silenced him. He rose from the chair with stiff movements, avoiding looking at Clara, and walked toward the back of the bank with the posture of a defeated man. "Miss Miller," Beatrice said, turning her attention back to the young woman, "could you accompany me to my office? I will personally handle the entire fund release and asset transfer process, and Dr. Foster, of course, is invited to join us." Clara looked at August, uncertain. He gave her a reassuring smile and a slight nod. "You can go ahead," he said gently. "I'll be by your side every step of the way." They followed Beatrice across the lobby, passing the clients who now watched them with a mixture of curiosity and embarrassment. Clara kept her eyes fixed ahead, trying to ignore the stares. They entered a corridor lined with fine wood that led to the administrative area. Beatrice's office was at the end of the hall, a spacious room overlooking the financial district through enormous glass windows. "Please, have a seat," Beatrice said, indicating two comfortable armchairs in front of her desk. "Can I offer you coffee, water, anything else?" "Water, please," Clara managed to say, her throat dry from crying. Beatrice poured fresh water into crystal glasses and then sat behind her desk. "Before we begin the formal procedures," she said, looking directly at Clara, "I would like to say something personally. What happened today is inexcusable. No person should be treated the way you were treated, regardless of their financial situation or appearance. This bank has existed for 40 years and has always prided itself on its excellence in service. Mr. Allen violated not only our protocols, but also basic principles of human dignity." She paused, picking up a pen on her desk and twirling it between her fingers. "I'll be honest with you. Cases like this make me furious because they reveal something we would prefer not to admit, which is the systemic prejudice that still exists in institutions like ours. Employees like Robert are trained to identify fraud, but sometimes that training turns into prejudice disguised as caution." August leaned forward. "Ms. Nolan, I appreciate your honesty. But honesty is not enough to repair the damage caused. Miss Miller was exposed to public humiliation, accused of a crime, treated as if she were unworthy of being in this space. This has profound emotional consequences. Beatrice nodded. I fully agree. That is why, in addition to processing the immediate transfer of funds as per the court order, the bank is prepared to offer significant compensation for emotional distress. We are talking about a substantial amount which will be negotiated directly with the legal department. But I can tell you it will be no less than $500,000. Clara choked on the water she was drinking. $500,000, she repeated, incredulous. It is the minimum we consider fair given the circumstances, Beatrice said. Furthermore, you will have a dedicated premium manager exclusively for your needs, all the bank's products and services at your disposal without fees for the next 5 years, and free financial consulting to help you manage your inheritance in the best possible way. August watched everything with satisfaction, but Clara noticed there was something more in his gaze, something she couldn't decipher, a familiarity perhaps, or a knowledge that went beyond this specific situation. Ms. Nolan, August said, before we proceed with the bureaucratic formalities, I would like to have a moment alone with my client, just a few minutes. Matters related to the deceased that need to be handled privately. Beatrice looked from one to the other and then nodded. Of course. You may use the adjacent conference room. I will prepare all the necessary documentation in the meantime. Miss Miller, when you return, we will have everything ready for your signature. August stood up and gestured for Clara to follow him. They left Beatrice's office and entered the adjacent conference room, a smaller but equally elegant space, with an oval mahogany table and upholstered chairs. August closed the door behind them and, for the first time since he had appeared, seemed hesitant. Clara, he began, and there was a softness in his voice that hadn't been there before. There is something I need to tell you, something that goes beyond this situation at the bank. Clara sat down in one of the chairs, suddenly feeling a deep exhaustion. Who are you? She asked directly. Why are you helping me? How did you know about my father? August pulled a chair and sat next to her, not across the table. He took a deep breath before starting to speak. My name is August Foster, as you already know. But what you don't know is that I'm not just an attorney who happened to show up here. The silence in the conference room was dense, charged with expectation. Clara watched August with wide eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in his expression, a mixture of contained emotion and determination, that made her both anxious and curious. I knew your father, August finally said, the words coming out slowly, as if each one carried a specific weight. I knew Henry for over 30 years. We were classmates at law school, we graduated together. But more than colleagues, we were friends. Best friends. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Throughout her life, her father had been an abstract figure, a name in old letters, a shadow without substance. And now, here was someone who had truly known him, who could give her details, stories, pieces of a person she never had the chance to meet. You knew my father, she repeated, her voice a whisper. Then you knew about me? August shook his head slowly. Not always. Let me explain. Henry told me about Maria, your mother, many times. He fell in love with her when he was 25. She worked as a secretary in one of the offices where he was interning. Henry came from a wealthy, traditional family with very specific expectations about whom he should marry. But he fell head over heels for Maria. He paused, his eyes distant as if seeing scenes from the past. They dated in secret for almost 2 years. Henry knew his family would never accept the relationship. Not because Maria wasn't a wonderful person, but because she didn't come from their social world. It was a battle he wasn't ready to face at that point in his life. Clara clenched her hands. In her lap. She felt anger and sadness at the same time. Anger at the family who judged her mother without knowing her. Sadness for the love that had been prevented from blossoming. One day, August continued, Maria simply disappeared. She stopped going to work, changed her address, changed her phone number. Henry was desperate. He asked me for help finding her, but it was impossible. It was as if she had evaporated. He spent months searching, but eventually his family pressured him to move on. A year later, under pressure from his parents, he married Mariana Costa, a woman from a traditional family his mother had chosen. "And he never knew my mother was pregnant," Clara said. "It wasn't a question. It was a realization." "No," August confirmed. "Maria never told him. I imagine she thought it would be a burden, an obligation. Or perhaps she was afraid he would think it was a trap to get his money. Whatever the reason, she made the decision to raise you alone, and Henry never knew he had a daughter." Clara felt the tears return, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of loss, of mourning for something that never had the chance to exist. "My mother," she said with a choked voice, "always spoke so highly of him. Even when things were tough, when we worked double shifts to pay the rent, she never said a bad word about him. She said he was a good man who was trapped in a world he didn't choose." "That was exactly it," August said softly. "Henry was brilliant, successful, rich, but he was also profoundly unhappy. The marriage to Mariana was a facade. They didn't have children, not because they didn't want to, but because there simply was no love there. It was a union of convenience, of surnames and fortunes, not of the heart." He stopped again, as if deciding how much more he should reveal. Then, 2 years ago, Henry discovered he was sick. Aggressive cancer, advanced stage. The doctors gave him maybe a year to live at most. It was a brutal shock. He was only 52, at the height of his career, and suddenly he was confronted with his own mortality. Clara wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "And that's when he decided to look for my mother?" August nodded. "He came to me and told me he had one thing he needed to do before he passed. He needed to find Maria. He needed to know what had happened, why she had disappeared. I hired private investigators. It took 4 months, but we finally found her." 4 months, Clara repeated. "How long ago was that?" "About a year and a half ago," August replied. "The investigators discovered that Maria was living in a simple house on the east side of the city, working as a house cleaner, and that she had a 25-year-old daughter, you." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. A year and a half. Her father had discovered her existence a year and a half ago, and she had only discovered his identity 8 months ago, when she found the letters in her mother's closet. "When Henry received that information," August continued, "he collapsed. Literally. He spent 3 days locked in his office, refusing to speak to anyone except me. He had a daughter he never met, who grew up without a father, who suffered hardship while he lived in mansions and drove imported cars. The guilt he felt was devastating. But he didn't come looking for us," Clara said, and there was a pang of hurt in her voice. "If he knew where we were, why didn't he come?" August sighed deeply. "Because he was afraid that you and your mother would reject him, afraid of causing more pain than he had already caused with his absence. And also because he wanted to do things the right way. He came to me to start the entire legal process of paternity recognition, to ensure that you would be his legitimate heir, that you would be entitled to everything he had built." He paused, his voice becoming more emotional. "Henry said he couldn't change the past. He couldn't recover the 25 years he had lost, but he could ensure your future was secure. He sold assets, reorganized investments, set up a solid financial structure. All for you." Clara was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. This man she never knew, this father who was just a name in old letters, had thought of her, had worried about her, had tried to correct his failures even when time was running out. "He planned to come personally," August said, his own voice now choked. "He had everything prepared. He was going to show up at your house on a Saturday morning with flowers and a letter explaining everything. But the disease progressed faster than the doctors predicted. In the last few months, he could barely get out of bed." Clara lifted her tear-filled eyes. "Did he suffer much?" August hesitated before answering. "He suffered, yes. Physically, the disease was brutal. But the emotional suffering was even worse. He passed away knowing he had a daughter he never hugged, never heard her voice, never saw her smile. In his last days, he only talked about you. He asked what you were like, if you looked like him, if you had inherited any of his traits. Why didn't you contact us sooner? Clara asked, her voice now firmer despite the tears. If you knew about me, if you were taking care of everything, why did you wait until today? Because he asked me to, August replied simply. Henry made one last request before he passed. He made me promise that I would let you forge your own path, that I wouldn't interfere in the legal process you would have to face to prove your parentage. He thought you needed to do this on your own, to prove your strength, your determination. He didn't want you to think you were getting things just because he had made it easy. Clara shook her head, incredulous. But I went through 6 months of hell. I sold everything I had, went into debt, faced his family's lawyers who tried to prove I was an imposter. Why did he think I needed to go through that? Because he knew you, August said, surprising Clara. He had investigators who brought him monthly reports about you. It wasn't an invasion of privacy in a bad way. It was a father trying to know his daughter from afar. He knew you were strong, hard-working, principled. He knew you had earned your accounting degree studying at night while working during the day. He knew you cared for your mother devotedly, and he thought you deserved the chance to prove to the world and to yourself that you were capable of fighting for your rights. It was a tortuous logic, Clara thought, but somehow it made sense. Her father, even sick and distant, had tried to give her something more valuable than money. He had tried to give her self-confidence, the certainty that she could win difficult battles. But I wouldn't let you go through humiliation, August continued, his voice growing firmer. Henry asked me not to interfere in the judicial process, and I respected that. But he also made me promise that when everything was settled, when you finally came to claim your inheritance, I would be there to ensure no one treated you badly. He made me promise I would protect you. That's why you showed up at the bank today, Clara said, understanding finally dawning in her eyes. August nodded. I was monitoring your court case. I knew the order for fund release had been issued 3 weeks ago. I figured you'd be coming to the bank soon. So, for the past few days, I've been stopping by here every morning, waiting. When I saw you walk in today, I recognized you immediately from the photos Henry showed me. And when I realized how that idiot was treating you, I couldn't stay quiet. Clara felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly choked her. But along with the gratitude came an overwhelming sense of loss. Loss for the father she never knew, for the relationship they never had, for the years that had been stolen from both of them. Did he leave anything for me? She asked. Besides the money? A letter? A message? Arthur smiled for the first time, and it was a gentle, paternal smile. He did, but not here. It's in his private vault, deep in the sublevel of this bank. I have the key and the authorization to take you there. But first, we need to finalize all the paperwork with Miss Beatrice, ensure the money is transferred correctly and that everything is done by the book. Clara nodded, wiping her face once more. She was emotionally exhausted, but she also felt a kind of peace beginning to settle in her heart. It wasn't the happy ending she would have chosen. She didn't have her father alive to hug and get to know. But she had something. She had stories. She had a friend of his who could tell her more, and she had the certainty that she had been loved, even from a distance. There's one more thing, Arthur said, turning serious again. Henry's family, his widow, Mary Ann, and his parents. They didn't take the paternity acknowledgement well. They tried to contest it, hired the best lawyers to prove it was a fraud. It was an ugly battle. I know, Clara said bitterly. Their lawyers made me take the DNA test 3 times. They subjected me to cruel interrogations, tried to destroy my mother's reputation, insinuated she was a gold digger who set the whole thing up. Arthur pressed his lips into a thin line. I wanted to intervene then, but I had promised Henry I wouldn't. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, watching you suffer through that from afar without being able to help directly. And now? Clara asked, worry coloring her voice. Are they going to try to reverse the court decision? Are they going to keep harassing me? They can't, Arthur said with conviction. The judgment is final. There are no more possible appeals. And besides, Henry documented everything meticulously. There are videos he recorded explaining his wishes. There are letters. There is all sorts of evidence that the acknowledgement was legitimate and desired. They may not like it, but they will have to accept it. Arthur and Clara remained silent for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Arthur stood up and extended his hand to Clara. "Come on," he said gently. "Ms. Beatrice must be waiting for us. The faster we resolve the bureaucratic part, the faster we can go to the vault." Clara took his hand and stood up. She felt strangely light despite the emotional weight of the conversation she had just had. It was as if a knot she hadn't even known existed in her chest had finally come undone. They returned to Beatrice's office, where she was waiting for them with a stack of organized documents on the table. "Miss Clara," Beatrice said as they entered, "I have everything ready here. There are a lot of papers to sign, but I will explain each one calmly. There is no rush. We can take all the time necessary." Over the next 2 hours, Clara signed document after document: transfer authorizations, inheritance acceptance terms, tax forms, new account registrations, powers of attorney for Arthur to act as her lawyer and financial consultant. Beatrice patiently explained each item, ensuring Clara understood exactly what she was signing. Throughout the process, Beatrice maintained a respectful and attentive tone that contrasted drastically with the treatment Clara had received from Robert. The regional manager also formally introduced the premium manager who would be dedicated to Clara, a man named Frank Riley, about 35, who proved to be helpful and professional. "Miss Clara," Frank said when introduced, "it will be an honor to work with you. I am at your disposal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any need you have, you can call me directly at this number." He handed her a business card with embossed gold lettering. "In addition to the transfer of funds," Beatrice continued, "we are also arranging the transfer of investment fund applications. Dr. Arthur and Frank will work together to ensure your assets are managed in the best possible way, maximizing your returns while maintaining capital security." Clara just nodded. The magnitude of the numbers was difficult to process. Nearly $7 million. It was more money than she had earned in her entire life. More money than she could spend even living comfortably for decades. Her mother would never again have to clean strangers' houses. She herself would never again have to wake up at 5 in the morning to take 3 buses to work. There is also the matter of compensation for the emotional distress suffered today, Beatrice said, her voice growing more serious. "As I mentioned earlier, the bank is offering $500,000. But if Dr. Arthur considers this amount insufficient, we are open to negotiation." Arthur leaned forward. "The amount is fair as a starting point," he said. "But I would like to add some conditions. First, that Mr. Robert Alvarez be formally fired, not just suspended. Second, that the bank implement a mandatory training program on bias and discrimination for all employees. Third, that there be an internal audit to verify if other clients have been treated similarly in the past." Beatrice did not hesitate. "I agree with all conditions. Mr. Alvarez will be fired for cause later today. The training program will be implemented within 30 days, and the audit will begin next week. We will have external consultants to ensure impartiality." Arthur looked at Clara. "What do you think? Do you agree with these terms?" Clara thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to make Robert suffer more, wanted to sue him individually, wanted to see him ruined. But another part, the part her mother had raised with values of forgiveness and compassion, recognized that revenge would not bring peace. "I agree," she finally said, "but I want him to know why he is being fired. I want him to understand that it wasn't just because he made a mistake, but because he chose to judge someone based on appearance, because he chose cruelty instead of humanity." Beatrice nodded in approval. "I will personally make sure to communicate that to him, and you have every right to be present for that conversation, if you wish." Clara shook her head. No, I don't need to see him again. I just need to know he understood the lesson. With all the documents signed and all the terms agreed upon, Beatrice stood up and extended her hand to Clara. It was an honor to meet you, Miss Clara, even under the regrettable circumstances that brought you here today. I hope that from now on, your experience with our bank will be completely different. Clara shook her hand. Thank you for resolving the situation, she said sincerely, and for taking what happened seriously. After saying goodbye to Beatrice and Frank, Arthur led Clara back to the main lobby. The movement had increased. It was almost noon and the bank was busier. But this time, as they crossed the marble space, Clara walked differently, not with arrogance, but with dignity. She knew who she was. She knew she had as much right to be there as anyone else. They took the elevator down to the sublevel, where the private vaults were located. It was a maximum security area, with armored doors and armed guards. Arthur showed his credentials and the legal authorization to access Henry Tavares's vault. After several verification procedures, including fingerprint reading and facial recognition, they were finally led to a small, private room. In the center of the room was a simple table and 2 chairs. Arthur placed his briefcase on the table and took out an old golden key with ornate details. This key, he said, opens your father's private vault. He personally gave it to me 2 weeks before he passed, saying that when the time was right, I would know what to do. He used the key to open a compartment in the wall. From inside, he retrieved a polished mahogany box, not very large, maybe the size of a shoebox. He placed it on the table with reverent care. I'll leave you alone to open it, Arthur said softly. These are private moments between father and daughter, even if he is no longer here. I'll be outside when you're ready. Clara looked at the box, her heart pounding. Wait, she said as Arthur turned to leave. You can stay. Please. I don't want to be alone right now. Arthur returned and sat beside her, not facing her. With trembling hands, Clara opened the box. The interior was lined with dark red velvet. There were several items carefully arranged. The first item that caught her attention was a necklace. It was white gold, delicate, but clearly antique, with a teardrop pendant encrusted with small diamonds. It's beautiful, she whispered. It belonged to your paternal grandmother, Arthur explained. Henry told me it was the most precious piece of jewelry in the family, inherited from generation to generation. He wanted you to have it, to know that you are part of that lineage, regardless of what the family may have said or done. Clara picked up the necklace delicately, feeling its weight in her hands. She had never owned anything so valuable. Under the necklace was a thick, cream-colored envelope with her name handwritten in elegant, but shaky calligraphy. Clara Mendez Tavares, my daughter. She picked up the envelope, but her hands were shaking so much she could barely open it. Arthur gently took the envelope from her, carefully opened it, and returned the pages to her hands. They were 3 sheets of paper, covered with the same shaky handwriting, clearly written by someone very ill. Clara began to read, and tears immediately started to fall, blurring some of the words. My dearest Clara, the letter began. I write these words knowing that I will never have the chance to say them personally, and that is the greatest sadness of my life. I am your father, Henry, and although I never met you, I love you with an intensity that surprises and devastates me in equal measure. I discovered your existence too late. When the investigators brought me the news that Maria, the love of my youth, had had a daughter, my daughter, I felt a joy so great that my sick heart almost couldn't bear it. But along with the joy came overwhelming guilt. 25 years. 25 years you grew up without a father, struggling, suffering, needing things, while I lived a life of privilege I didn't deserve. Clara had to stop reading for a moment, sobbing. Arthur placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering silent comfort. I want you to know, the letter continued, that your mother was the great love of my life. I was a coward when I let my family push me away from her. I was a coward when I chose social approval over true love. That cowardice cost me a lifetime of happiness, and it cost you and Maria much more. There are not enough words to express my regret. The investigators told me about you, about how hardworking, honest, and strong you are, about how you took care of your mother when she was sick, working 3 jobs to pay for treatment, about how you went back to school at night, determined to get a better education. Every detail I learned filled me with pride and pain. Pride because you are everything I would want a daughter to be. Pain because I wasn't there to support you, to guide you, to simply hug you and tell you I love you. The money I am leaving is just money. It cannot buy back the lost years. It cannot replace my presence. But I hope it can give you security, that it can allow you and your mother to live with dignity, that you can realize dreams you may have abandoned out of necessity. I asked Arthur not to interfere in your legal process because I believed you needed to prove to the world, and especially to yourself, that you are strong enough to fight for your rights. But I also asked him to be there when you claimed your inheritance, to ensure no one treated you with disrespect. Arthur is my brother in spirit. Trust him as I trust him. He will guide you, protect you, in a way that I could not. The necklace in this box belonged to my mother, your grandmother Eleanor. She was a strong, kind woman who would have loved you deeply. I want you to wear it and remember that you carry within you the strength of the women who came before. You are not just the daughter of a brave housekeeper, you are also descended from a lineage of women who faced adversity and prevailed. There are also some photos of me in different phases of life in this box. We don't have memories together, but I hope these images can give you some sense of who I was. I hope you can look at them and see something of yourself reflected. My dear daughter, I know I asked a lot by leaving you to fight for your inheritance alone, but I believed you needed that victory. You needed to prove that you belong in any space you choose to occupy, not because you are my daughter, but because you are Clara, strong, determined, worthy. Forgive me for not being the father you deserved. Forgive me for all the birthdays I missed, for all the times you needed a father's hug and he wasn't there. Forgive me for letting fear and cowardice keep me away from the greatest gift life could have given me. Live well, my daughter. Love deeply. Always be kind, but never let anyone make you feel small. You are the daughter of Maria Mendez, the bravest woman I have ever known, and you are the daughter of Henry Tavares, an imperfect man who loved you the only way he knew how. With all my love and all my regret, your father, Henry. Clara finished reading and just sat there, holding the pages, crying silently. Arthur said nothing, just remained by her side, allowing her to process everything in her own time. After long minutes, Clara carefully put the letter back in the envelope and looked inside the box again. There was a small photo album. She opened it and saw her father for the first time. Photos of him young, smiling, full of life. Photos of him older, more serious, his eyes revealing an invisible weight. In the last photo, he was visibly ill, thin, pale, but there was something gentle in his expression, as if he had finally found peace. He was handsome, Clara said, tracing his face in the photo with her finger. I have his eyes. Yes, Arthur confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. And his smile, too. Henry used to say he had a crooked smile, and you have the exact same one. Clara closed the album and picked up the necklace again. With still trembling fingers, she put it around her neck. The metal was cold against her skin, but somehow it made her feel connected, anchored. I'll wear it every day, she said, to remember him, to remember where I came from. Arthur smiled. He would be happy to know that. They remained in the vault room for a few more minutes, in respectful silence, as if they were keeping vigil. Finally, Clara carefully put all the items back in the box, now her box, her emotional inheritance beyond the financial one. When Clara and Arthur finally left the bank, it was already mid-afternoon. The sky remained cloudy, but to Clara it seemed like the whole world was brighter. She pressed the mahogany box against her chest, protecting her most precious treasure, while in her purse she carried documents that completely changed the course of her life. "Let me take you home," Arthur offered, indicating a luxurious black car parked in front of the bank. His private driver was at the wheel. Clara hesitated. "I live pretty far from here," she said. "In Hope Village on the east side. You don't need to bother." "It's no bother," Arthur insisted gently. "And besides, I would like to meet Maria, if she allows it, of course. After all, she was the great love of my best friend, and I am curious to finally meet the woman who marked Henry's life so much." Clara felt a pang in her heart thinking about her mother. Maria still didn't know anything that had happened that day. She thought her daughter had simply gone to the bank to resolve the inheritance transfer, without imagining the drama and intense emotions Clara had experienced. "All right," Clara agreed, "but I need to warn her first. She's not well, she has a heart condition, and I don't want her to go into shock." During the drive to the east side, which took almost an hour in the heavy city traffic, Clara called her mother. "Mom," she said when Maria answered, "a lot happened today." "I'm fine. Everything is resolved, but I need you to sit down when I get there because I have a lot to tell you." "Daughter, you're scaring me," Maria said on the other end of the line, her weak voice revealing her debilitated condition. "What happened? Was there a problem at the bank?" "Nothing that wasn't resolved," Clara assured her. "But I'm bringing someone with me, a lawyer who," she hesitated, "who knew my father. He has many things to tell us." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Maria said, her voice even weaker, "All right, daughter. I'll be waiting." In the car, Arthur watched the landscape gradually change. The glass and steel skyscrapers of the financial district gave way to more modest buildings, then simple houses, narrow streets, and neighborhood shops. Hope Village was a working-class neighborhood where honest workers struggled day after day to support their families with dignity. "It's right there," Clara indicated a narrow street. "The yellow house with the green gate." The driver stopped the car in front. It was a small but well-kept house with a little garden in front where some flowers grew in improvised pots. The iron gate was a little rusty but recently painted, and the walls, although faded, were clean. Clara got out of the car, holding the box carefully. Arthur followed her, and she couldn't help but notice the contrast between him, with his expensive suit and refined posture, and that humble environment. But he showed no discomfort or judgment, only respectful interest. When Clara opened the door, she found her mother sitting on the worn sofa in the small living room. Maria Mendez was 52, but looked older. The years of hard work had slightly curved her back, and the recent heart disease had further thinned her already small body, but her eyes, the same dark brown shade as Clara's, still shone with intelligence and sweetness. "Mom," Clara said, sitting beside her and taking her hands. "This is Dr. Arthur Ferreira." He was Henry's best friend. Maria looked at Arthur with a complex expression, a mixture of curiosity, nervousness, and perhaps a touch of sadness. "Hello, doctor," she said politely. "Please sit down. Excuse the simple house." "Your house is welcoming, Mrs. Maria," Arthur said sincerely, sitting in the only available armchair. "And it is an honor to finally meet you. Henry spoke so much about you in the last months of his life that I feel like I already know you." Maria squeezed Clara's hand, seeking strength. She began, her voice faltering. "He remembered me then? After all these years?" "He never forgot you," Arthur said gently. "You were the great love of his life, Mrs. Maria. The marriage he had was just a social formality. It was you he carried in his heart, all these years." Tears began to roll down Maria's face. "Why didn't he look for me? When he found out about the illness, why didn't he come?" Arthur leaned forward. "He wanted to. He planned 1,000 times how he would do it. But he was afraid that you would reject him after so many years of abandonment, afraid of causing more pain. And also," he hesitated, "he wanted to set things right first. He wanted to ensure Clara was legally recognized, that she had all the rights as an heir. I never wanted anything from him," Maria said, almost defensively. I raised my daughter alone and with pride. I never asked for a penny. I know, Arthur said. And Henry knew too. That's exactly why he loved you so much. Because you were genuine, not self-serving. Because you chose to leave instead of trapping him with a pregnancy he might interpret as a setup. Clara, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. Mom, there's something I need to show you. She opened the mahogany box and carefully took out the letter. He wrote this, for me, but I think you need to read it too. With trembling hands, Maria took the pages and began to read. Clara and Arthur remained silent, watching the emotions pass across the face of the woman, who had carried so much weight alone for so many years. When Maria reached the part where Henry spoke about her, about how he had been a coward, about how she was the great love of his life, she broke down in deep sobs. Clara hugged her, letting her cry. They were tears of pain, yes, for the life that could have been and wasn't. But they were also tears of validation, of knowing that the love she had felt was not unilateral, that he had also suffered, that she had meant something to him. When Maria finally calmed down, she looked at the necklace Clara was wearing. It's beautiful, she said in a hoarse voice. Was it his mother's? Clara's grandmother's, Arthur confirmed. Henry wanted her to know that she is part of the family, that she has a lineage, not just on your side, Mrs. Maria, but on his side too. Maria nodded slowly, then looked at Clara. And the money? Were you able to resolve everything at the bank? It was complicated, Clara said, the anger returning a little when she remembered Robert. A manager treated me very badly, accused me of being a fraud, tried to kick me out of the bank. It was horrible, Mom. But Dr. Arthur showed up and resolved everything. She then told the whole story, from the initial humiliation to Arthur's intervention, the discovery of the millionaire balance, Robert's firing, the compensation offered by the bank. Maria listened to everything with wide eyes of disbelief. Nearly $7 million, Maria repeated when Clara finished. My God, daughter, that is so much money. What are we going to do with so much money? Clara smiled through her tears. First, you are going to stop working immediately. You will get heart treatment with the best doctors in a private hospital, no lines, no waiting. We are going to move out of here to a better house, or maybe an apartment in a quieter place. And you are going to rest, Mom. You will finally be able to rest. Maria shook her head, more tears falling. I don't need a big house, daughter. This one was always enough. But now we can have more, Clara insisted. Not because this house isn't good, but because we deserve it. You worked your whole life, Mom. You cleaned other people's houses while ours went without your care. Because you were always exhausted. You deserve to have a beautiful, comfortable place where you can finally live, instead of just survive. Arthur watched the exchange between mother and daughter with a gentle smile. Henry was right about you too, he said. He said Mrs. Maria had raised an extraordinary daughter, and now I see he was completely right. Mrs. Maria, he continued, becoming more serious, I need to talk to you about some practical matters. Clara is young, and although she is intelligent and educated, she has never dealt with such large sums of money. With your permission, I would like to act as her financial consultant, helping her make wise decisions about investments, spending, and future planning. Maria looked at Clara, who nodded. I trust him, Mom, Clara said. He was my father's best friend, and today he proved he is on our side. Then it's decided, Maria said. Dr. Arthur, thank you for taking care of my daughter today, and for bringing news about Henry. As painful as it is, it's comforting to know he didn't forget us. Arthur stayed with them for another hour, explaining in simple terms how the investments would work, how much monthly income they could expect, and how the money could be managed to last generations. He spoke about the importance of not making immediate drastic changes, of taking time to adjust to the new financial reality, and of seeking advice before major decisions. There is also the matter of Henry's family, he said eventually, his tone becoming more cautious. The widow, Mary Ann, and his parents. They were not, how shall I say, receptive to Clara's paternity acknowledgement. They tried to stop it, Clara said bitterly. They hired expensive lawyers to prove I was an imposter. They will try to contact you, Arthur warned. Now that the money has been transferred, they may try other approaches. They might offer settlements for Clara to publicly renounce the inheritance. They might even try a more, shall we say, personal approach. What are you saying? Maria asked, worry evident in her voice. Is that my daughter is in danger? Not in physical danger, Arthur quickly clarified, but in danger of being manipulated, pressured, or publicly exposed. The Tavares family is powerful and well-connected. They might try to use the media, they might try to harm Clara's reputation, they might do many things. So what do we do? Clara asked, feeling fear tighten her stomach. First, do not speak to anyone in the family without my presence, Arthur instructed. Second, if approached by journalists, do not give interviews, do not make statements. Third, live your lives with dignity and discretion. Don't flaunt it. Don't make a big deal. Show the world that you are not opportunists, but legitimate heirs who respect Henry's memory. We can do that, Maria said firmly. We have always lived with dignity, even in poverty. Money will not change our character. Arthur smiled. That is exactly why Henry chose well when he loved you, Mrs. Maria. And that is why I am sure Clara will know how to handle her inheritance wisely. When Arthur finally said goodbye, it was already evening. He left several contact cards, emergency numbers, and the promise that he would return in a few days to continue helping with the practical aspects of financial management. After he left, Clara and Maria sat on the sofa in silence, processing everything that had happened. It was the longest day of my life, Clara finally said. Mine too, Maria agreed. But it was also the day when many old wounds began to heal. Clara took off the necklace and placed it in her mother's hands. He loved you, Mom. The letter makes that very clear. And I'm sorry you didn't have the chance to be together. Maria caressed the necklace with delicate fingers. I am too. But you know what, daughter? Maybe things happened the way they were supposed to. If we had stayed together, I would never know if he loved me for me or out of obligation. I would always have the doubt if he had stayed just because of the pregnancy. This way, even with all the pain, I know the love was real. And I have you, who is the best of both of us. They hugged, and in that moment, in the simple house they would soon leave, but which would forever hold their most precious memories, they felt a peace they hadn't known for a long time. It wasn't the perfect ending of a fairy tale. But it was real, it was theirs, and it was the beginning of something new. 3 months passed since that transformative day at the bank. Autumn had arrived, bringing milder temperatures and frequently cloudy skies, but for Clara and Maria, each day seemed brighter than the last. They had moved into a spacious apartment in a nice, middle-class neighborhood with good infrastructure and easy access to hospitals and shops. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't unnecessary ostentation, but it was comfortable, safe, and had 3 bedrooms, which meant each had her own space, plus a guest room for when they wanted to receive visitors. Maria had stopped working as promised and was receiving regular medical follow-ups. Private cardiologists had adjusted her medication, and she was responding well to the treatment. The lines of constant worry on her face had begun to soften, replaced by a more serene expression. She spent her days tending a small garden on the apartment balcony, reading the books she had never had time for, and gradually discovering who Maria Mendez was beyond mother and worker. Clara had also made changes in her life, but gradually, as Arthur had advised. She continued working for another month after receiving the inheritance, wanting to make a dignified transition and give her employers advance notice. When she finally left, it was with letters of recommendation and the sincere gratitude of people who had learned to respect her over the years. Now she was enrolled in a postgraduate course in financial management. Arthur had suggested she invest in education, that she learn to manage not only her own fortune, but also qualify herself to perhaps, in the future, help others in similar situations. The idea had resonated deeply with Clara. She didn't want to be just a passive heiress, but someone who made a difference. The bank had fulfilled all its promises. Robert had been fired and, according to Frank, Clara's premium manager, was having great difficulty finding a new job, as the story of how he had treated a client had circulated discreetly in financial circles. Clara felt no pleasure in his suffering, but there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that actions had consequences. The training program on bias and discrimination had been implemented in all bank branches, and Beatrice, the regional manager, had even asked Clara's permission to use her story, without revealing names, as a case study in the training. Clara agreed, hoping her experience could prevent others from going through the same thing. The $500,000 compensation had been deposited as agreed. Clara used part of it to pay off all the debts incurred during the legal process, to gift her mother with some items she had always dreamed of having, and to create a small charity fund that helped vulnerable single mothers pay for legal services. It was her way of turning pain into purpose. As for the Tavares family, things had been more complicated. As Arthur predicted, there were attempts at contact. First came the lawyers with settlement proposals, offering smaller amounts in exchange for Clara publicly renouncing her status as an heir and the Tavares surname. Clara categorically refused, advised by Arthur. She was not interested in additional money, and she certainly wasn't going to deny her own identity to comfort people who had treated her as a fraud. Then came the more personal attempts. The widow, Marianne, had shown up at their apartment one afternoon, unannounced. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, impeccably styled blonde hair, wearing designer clothes and exuding expensive perfume. But in her eyes there was something Clara didn't expect. It wasn't anger, it was weariness. Maria had answered the door, and after a moment of tension where the two women stared at each other, had invited Marianne in. Clara came down from her room and found the two sitting in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. "I didn't come to fight," Marianne had said her first words. "Nor did I come to try to convince you to give up the inheritance. I came because I needed to see with my own eyes the woman Henry truly loved and the daughter he had with her." What followed was a long and painful conversation. Marianne confessed that she had always known her marriage to Henry was a sham, that both had agreed to live that lie for practical, familial, and social reasons. She herself had her own past love she had had to abandon. When Henry fell ill and began talking about Maria and a daughter he had just discovered, Marianne wasn't jealous. She was sad for the life they had both wasted in a loveless marriage. "I tried to prevent the paternity acknowledgement," Marianne admitted, "because Henry's family pressured me terribly. His parents, his siblings, everyone thought it was a scam, that you were taking advantage of a dying man. But deep down, I think I knew the truth." She looked directly at Clara. "You have his eyes. And that crooked smile. There's no denying you're his daughter." The meeting ended surprisingly amicably. Marianne did not propose friendship, did not try to insert herself into their lives, but established a truce. She promised there would be no more attempts to reverse the paternity acknowledgement, no more legal harassment or pressure. In return, she only asked that Clara be discreet about the inheritance, that she not give interviews exposing the family, that she allow the Tavares name to maintain some dignity. Clara agreed. She had no interest in public exposure anyway. Her revenge, if it could be called that, was simply to live well, to prove she was worthy of the inheritance not by the clothes she wore or the surname she carried, but by the character her mother had taught her. Henry's parents never contacted them, and Clara was perfectly comfortable with that. She felt no need to be accepted by people who had rejected her before even meeting her. She had her mother, she had Arthur, who had become an almost paternal figure in her life, and she had a few true friends who remained by her side even when they found out about her inheritance. Arthur visited them regularly, always bringing financial advice, but also increasingly simply coming for dinner, to talk, to share stories about Henry that helped Clara get to know the father she never had. He told her about the mischief they got into in college, about the dreams Henry had when he was young, about how funny and intelligent he was, and yes, also cowardly in some aspects, but fundamentally good. On that specific autumn afternoon, 3 months after the day at the bank, Clara was sitting on the apartment balcony, studying for a postgraduate exam. Maria was next to her, knitting a scarf. something she had recently taken up as a hobby. The white gold necklace, the one that had belonged to grandmother Eleanor, shone against the simple blouse Clara was wearing. She wore it every day as she had promised, a constant reminder of her roots, both humble and noble. Clara's phone rang. It was Frank, her premium bank manager. "Good afternoon, Miss Clara," he said with his usual courtesy. "I'm calling to confirm that this month's returns have been deposited as expected, and also to inform you about an investment opportunity that may be of interest to you." They talked for a few minutes about numbers, percentages, projections. Clara asked intelligent questions, the result of her postgraduate studies and hours of counseling with Arthur. She was no longer the frightened, lost young woman who had entered the bank 3 months ago. She was becoming a woman who understood finance, who made informed decisions, who grew in confidence day by day. After she hung up, she looked at her mother. "You know, Mom," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes it still feels like a dream. Everything that happened. The discovery about my father, the legal battle, that horrible day at the bank, the money, everything." Maria stopped knitting and looked at her daughter. "And do you regret seeking it out? Opening that shoebox and discovering the letters?" Clara thought for a long moment. "No," she finally said, "because even with all the pain, with all the difficulty, now I know exactly who I am. I know where I came from. I have a name, a story, and I have you, who was always the greatest inheritance I could have received, with or without money." Mary smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become, sweetie." "I know he would." That night, Clara had a dream. She dreamed she was in a vast, beautiful garden filled with flowers she had never seen before. She walked along the stone paths when she spotted a man with his back to her, watching a pond in the center of the garden. She knew, in the way you just know things in dreams, that it was her father. Her heart pounded as she approached. When she got close enough, he turned around. He truly had her eyes, that same crooked smile. He opened his arms and she ran into them, feeling an embrace that was simultaneously the ache of something she never had and profound comfort. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "I know," she replied in the dream. "I read your letter. I understand. You're going to be okay," he said, pulling back slightly to look at her face. "You and your mother are going to be fine. You are both stronger than you realize." When Clara woke up, there were tears on her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of acceptance, closure, and peace. Her father would never return. He could never undo the absence or reclaim the lost years. But somehow, through his final attempt to right his wrongs, through the material and emotional legacy he left behind, he had given her something invaluable, the certainty that she was loved. The following week, Clara made a major decision. She sought out Gus and proposed they establish a foundation together to help unrecognized children prove paternity and claim their rights. She would invest a portion of her inheritance, Gus would contribute his legal expertise, and together they would offer free legal support to people in situations similar to hers. Gus embraced the idea enthusiastically. "Henry would have loved this," he said, clearly moved. "Turning your pain into something that helps others. It's perfect." The foundation was established 3 months later, named the Henry and Mary Foundation, honoring both the father who belatedly recognized his daughter and the mother who raised that daughter with love and sacrifice. The inauguration day was attended by lawyers, judges, social workers, and, most importantly, several people who had already been helped by the foundation in its first few months of operation. Clara gave a short speech, nervous but determined. She spoke about her journey, how she had almost given up multiple times, and about that day at the bank when she was treated like a criminal. She emphasized the importance of fighting for one's rights, but also how no one should ever have to fight alone. "Every child deserves to know who they are," she said, her steady voice echoing through the hall. "They deserve access to their own name, their own history, and no child should ever be judged by the circumstances of their birth or their mother's financial situation." This foundation exists to ensure that every child who finds themselves in the situation I was in has the necessary support to claim their identity. The audience gave a standing ovation. Mary, sitting in the front row wearing a new, elegant but not flashy dress, wept with pride. Gus, beside her, had a huge smile plastered across his face. After the event, while talking with some of the people the foundation was helping, Clara realized something fundamental. The true inheritance her father had left her wasn't the millions in the bank account. It was the opportunity to make a difference, to transform a story of pain and absence into something that brought justice and dignity to others. That night, back in the apartment, Clara stood on the balcony looking out at the city lights. She wore her grandmother Ellen's necklace, as always. In her hand, she held the letter her father had written, already read so many times that she knew every word by heart. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered into the wind. "Thank you for loving me the way you could. Thank you for giving me not just financial security, but purpose. I promise to honor your memory, not with extravagance or arrogance, but with hard work, dignity, and compassion." The night breeze stirred her hair, and for a moment, Clara felt as if it were a reply, an approval coming from somewhere beyond her understanding. She smiled, turned, and went back inside, where her mother was waiting with hot tea and the promise of a quiet evening discussing plans for the foundation. Life wasn't perfect. There were still tough days, still moments when her father's absence weighed heavily, and still emotional scars that would take time to heal. But there was also joy, hope, and purpose. There was the certainty that, despite all the obstacles, all the pain, and all the injustice, the truth had prevailed. Dignity had prevailed. And in the end, that terrible day at the bank, when she was humiliated and nearly thrown out, had become the catalyst for something greater. It became the story she would tell the people she helped through the foundation, an example that no matter how powerful the prejudice, how deep the discrimination, truth and perseverance always find a way. Clara Mendez Tavares was no longer just the unrecognized daughter of a wealthy businessman. She was no longer just the poor girl from the East Side. She was all those things and more. She was a dedicated student, a loving daughter, an emerging philanthropist, a fighter for justice. Above all, she was herself, complete and whole. And as she prepared for bed that night, with her mother sleeping soundly in the next room, and grandmother Ellen's necklace carefully tucked away in her jewelry box, Clara finally allowed herself to feel something she had avoided for so long. Peace. Peace with her past, confidence in her present, and hope for her future. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was worth every tear, every moment of doubt, every instance of humiliation. Because in the end, she hadn't just found her financial inheritance. She had found herself. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Clara and Mary touched your hearts deeply. This narrative reminds us that human dignity isn't measured by expensive clothes or bank accounts, but by character and the courage to fight for our rights. If this powerful story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and smash that like button. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages of hope. Every day, we bring you unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit and the importance of treating one another with respect and compassion. Tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a situation of prejudice or discrimination? How did you handle it? We would love to hear your story. Until our next upload, and always remember this: your origin doesn't determine your destiny, but your choices certainly do.